So today we're going to talk about red flags when hiring developers remotely. Actually, this topic was recommended by one of you. So thank you, Shpatim, for recommending this topic. He's actually a SoftUp alumni, so hope you're doing well, and thanks for the recommendation. Today I have 5 red flags that I notice when hiring developers remotely, and if you're in the market for hiring, you would know to avoid these red flags. But especially if you're a developer, these are small things that you can fix, not to raise a red flag in the interview process. And the first one is very simple, very straightforward really, not showing up for the interview on time or at all, right? And there's a lot of dilemma about whether a person should be disqualified right away for this or given a second chance. But I tend to draw the line in the fact, when do I get notified? If I get notified before the interview, even like 10 minutes before the interview, I tend to give the person another chance. Or if the person has a medical or health issue that was just unavoidable, then I tend to do that. If it was just bad planning or something just minor, that's kind of a red flag for me. Another red flag is walking out of the interview. Again, for lack of good planning, usually. So the person just didn't have the right environment to begin with, and then they were forced to leave that room, or something came up in their work and they had to leave. Basically just anything that has to do with lack of good planning. Second one is ghosting. So of course companies get a lot of slack for ghosting people, right? They don't provide any feedback on the interviews. That's terrible. We try to avoid that as much as we can. Not that we're perfect, but we really do find that important, respecting the person's availability and time. But actually, developers and candidates in general sometimes ghost companies as well. We see it in 2 scenarios. We see it when we give out technical tasks. So we give a technical task, and sometimes we would ask for like a feedback within 24 to 48 hours, and then the person just doesn't reply even after the time has expired, basically. Or when everything's great and then we make an offer and then the candidate also doesn't reply for not just 1 or 2 days, which is normal. The person needs to think about it. But I'm talking about like 1 week, 1.5 weeks, 2 weeks. As a company or as a hiring manager or as a startup co-founder, you made an offer to this freelancer, developer, remote worker, or whatever it is, and they're not getting back to you. Means something's up. It's easy to make speculations, but it's just for sure you know that something's happened. Maybe they're not as excited anymore or whatever the case may be. So third one is no eagerness to learn more about the company or project or the team or how things work. This is a question that a lot of companies ask, and it still surprises me the amount of people who don't have an answer to this question. And it's a simple question. Do you have any questions about us? And there are cases where the company maybe is well known, or maybe you've researched their website, and that's nice. But it's still good to have some questions asked about the project, about the team, about the structure, about the company vision. The interview should be like a 2-way dialogue thing where both of you are trying to get to know each other, and not just like you're being interviewed and then you don't have any questions. It creates a bit of a awkward silence. Right. So point number 4, this comes in different shapes, but basically the candidate hasn't prepared that much for the interview, and then they try to list all the answers to your questions in a document somewhere, and then they try to read off their document as you ask that question. So just reading off the screen. I don't have an issue with people having a few notes, just reminders of something, and then just checking them once in a while. That's fine. But if I ask you, what is agile development, and then you have to scroll down to answer that question, and it's visible that you're scrolling down because the background of your screen is changing, it's reflected in your face. People can read through that, and it always creates an awkward dynamic, and people know what you're doing. So one way to avoid that actually is if you do a mock interview. If you just ask a friend or a colleague to interview you. What questions? Well, if you're a senior React developer, then just Google interview for senior React developer. And guess what? That's most likely some of the questions from the interview you'll get from this pack of questions. Like literally, that's what hiring managers do sometimes. And you just read the questions and you do maybe some algorithmic exercises, and you will be maybe not good to go. I mean, there's no guarantee, but you'll be 80% more prepared than just going at it cold, especially if you haven't done an interview in a while, or if you're not experienced with doing interviews in general. And then the last thing is no proper setup for the interview. So if you have slow internet, like a bad camera quality or no camera at all, or background noise. With a bad camera quality, for me, it's just a nice to have, especially when hiring remotely. You want to see the person face to face. Well, not face to face, but through the camera. You will probably not meet face to face in a while, like in a couple of weeks or months. So if this is a remote job, you want to have that personal touch, the personal first impression. So if your internet is slow, where the person cannot hear you or you cannot hear them, or there's a big lag, or if you're sitting in a coffee shop in a city center, in a busy coffee shop, it's just going to affect the impact of the interview. It's just facts, right? It's just hard facts. As a hiring manager, it's going to be very difficult to overcome that hurdle. You're not going to get as much out of the interview, and then therefore that's going to affect your decision. Actually, as a last point I want to make is, these are my red flag, but with any red flag, don't expect the red flag to change right after the interview. So if you hire someone and you notice that they lack in a certain way, let's say they came late for the interview, don't be surprised if they come late for the stand-up as well. This person will need to adjust their behavior a little bit. And this is a quote from Jordan Peterson. It's much better to select the right people than to expect people to change just because you hired them. So when you're hiring, just spend a little bit of that extra to avoid these red flags, especially when dealing with remote workers, remote developers, and I think you'll be better for it.